This is Module 3, the Topic C review. The first thing is adding fractions that have unlike denominators. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write the fractions vertical. So I have 2/7 plus 3/4. Then I'm going to list out, using my denominators, some multiples till I find one that is common. So I'm going to skip count. And then I'm going to skip count up here. And I see that 28 is a common denominator. So I'm going to change both of these to 28. And then I'm going to notice that when I do this, 7 times 4 was 28. So I need to do 2 times 4, which is 8. And then 4 times 7 is 28. So 3 times 7 is 21. And when I add those two together, I get 29/28. This is an improper fraction, so I must simplify. I cannot leave it like this. So I have to say 29 divided by 28. It goes in one time. 1 is left over out of 28. So my answer is 1 and 1/28. Next problem, since I have a mixed number and a fraction that's not mixed, I write my fraction, I write my mixed number. Now I'm going to convert my mixed number into an improper fraction by saying 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So I have 4/3. This was still 3/5. Now I have to come up with a common denominator for these two. And when I skip count by 3 and by 5, so I have 3 and I have 5, because those are my denominators. I notice that 15 is my new denominator. So I set that up. I then take notice that I did 5 times 3. So I have to do 3 times 3, which is 9. And here was 3 times 5, so 4 times 5 is 20. And when I add these two together, I get 29/15. And when I divide 29 by 15, I know that it goes in 1 and 14/15. So now I'm going to go down to the bottom, where I have to solve two problems that are mixed numbers. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write them again vertical. Once I write them vertical, I'm going to turn them into improper fractions. So 2 1/2 becomes 5/2, because I did 2 times 2 plus 1. And over here it's 3 times 3 plus 1, which would give me 9/3. And then I know if I did my multiples out, that 6 is my common denominator. So in this case, I did 2 times 3. So 5 times 3 is 15. And over here, I did 3 times 2. So 9 times 2 is 18. And when I add these two together, I get 33/6. It's an improper fraction. I must turn it to a mixed number. It goes in 5 times. There's 3 left over out of 6. Now I need to simplify. So I carry my 5 over, and both of those numbers can be divided by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 1/2. Now look at my other question. So I have 2 3/7 and 3 1/4. I'm going to first turn them into improper fractions. 2 times 7 is 14. 14 plus 3 is 17/7. And down here, 4 times 3 is 12. 12 plus 1 is 13/4. Now I'm going to take these two numbers right here, and I'm going to find a common denominator. And the common denominator for these two is 28. Now I'm going to look at them, and I know that I did 7 times 4 and 17 times 4. If you're someone who can't do the 17 times 4 in your head, go on the side just like this and do the math work, and you get your 68. And then over here, it's times 7, same thing. If that's too hard for you, do this on the side like this. And now I'm going to add these two together. And I have 159/28. I need to turn that into a mixed number. And when I want to turn that into a mixed number, I have to say 159 goes into 28, how many times. If it's something that you can't do in your head, you can go over here, take a guess at a number that might work. So if I do 6 and I have a 5 here, that would be 196. Well, that's too big. So maybe I'm going to try 28 times 5. And I have 140. That looks like it's big enough. So I'm going to say that it can go in 4 times. And there's 19 28ths left over. Now I'm going to go to the next page. And same thing, except this time we're going to subtract. So we have 3/4 minus 3/8. And the common denominator here, I don't need to go all the way to 32, because when I write out 4 and 8, my multiples, I see that I have an 8, so I can use 8. And since I know 4 times 2 is 8, 3 times 2 is 6. 8 times 1 is 8, 3 times 1 is 3. And when I subtract them, I get 3/8. Next, just like I did before, when I have mixed numbers, I have to turn them into improper fractions. I have to make sure that when I'm supposed to be subtracting, I subtract as well. So when I do this, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And over here, 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. Now I have to find a common denominator. And when I look at these two, my common denominator is 20. So I know this is times 5, so this is times 5, which will get me to 45. And this one was times 4, so this is times 4, and it gets me to 28. And when I subtract these two, I get 17 20ths. Last two questions. I have 2 and 2/3 minus 1 and 1/4. First thing I'm going to do is to turn them into improper fractions. When I turn them into improper fractions, I have 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. And over here, I have 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. When I look at these two numbers, I see that the new denominator I'd like to use is 12. 3 times 4 is 12, so 8 times 4 is 32. 4 times 3 is 12, so 5 times 3 is 15. And when I subtract these two numbers, I get 17 12ths, which still leaves me as an improper fraction, so I end up with 1 and 5 12ths. Last question. I have 8 and 3/4 minus 5 and 5/6. I'm going to turn them into an improper fraction first. So 4 times 8 is 32, plus 3 is 35, and that's fourths. And over here, 5 times 6 is 30, 30 plus 5 is 35, sixths. When I look at these two, many people want to go to 24. 12 is my easier denominator. So I'm doing times 3, and now my numbers are starting to get bigger. So I have 105 12ths. And then over here, it's times 2, times 2. And now when I subtract these two numbers, I have 35 12ths. And I have to turn it back into a mixed number, which would be 2 and 11 12ths. And that is how I add and subtract fractions and mixed numbers with unlike denominators.